All right, hey, anatomy students. Today's lesson is specific to COVID 19, which we know of the coronavirus that originated in Wuhan City, China, and we want to build up to our ability to specifically resist this virus once it gets into our bodies. So, this will be a two-part lesson. You'll get this first part, just some specifics about COVID 19. And then after spring break, we'll talk about how our bodies would specifically eliminate it, plus the vaccine side, preventing this disease. So let's get into this. Just some things about COVID 19. First of all, we know that it was a virus that originated from bats in Wuhan, China, with another animal possibly being involved. We're pretty sure that it originated in the Wuhan City meat market. A lot of conspiracy theories out there about possible other ways that it got into the general population. But as of now, we're pretty certain that bats were involved. As far as disease, this disease attacks the epithelial cells of the lungs and can cause severe respiratory disease. We've talked about antigens already in this immunology section of the class, and we know that the coronavirus is an RNA virus, and it has 5 specific antigens or proteins that it's made of. And you can probably see about four of those proteins in the picture on this slide, in terms of the reds, the oranges, and the grays. And I want to talk about a few of those. The spike protein, which is the triangular maroon protein you can see in the picture, is probably the most important one for the virus, because that is the protein that allows the virus to attach to epithelial cells in our lungs. And we know about epithelial cells already, and how they're flat and could be a variety. Well, they don't necessarily have to be flat. They can be squamous, columnar, cuboidal. But for this one, we specifically know that the spike protein goes after ciliated epithelial tissues, which are rampant in our lungs. The HE protein, which I don't know what the color of that would be in this picture, but it is the protein that allows the virus to invade those epithelial cells, so to literally get inside those cells. The N protein, once inside the epithelial cells, becomes like the virus factory. It helps make thousands, if not millions, of new viruses inside that cell. The envelope protein allows the virus to assemble itself so it looks like the picture that you see on this slide. And then the membrane protein is probably the gray in the picture. It's just the protein that surrounds the RNA that is hiding inside the virus. Some other things about COVID-19, and we know this, that it spreads by droplets. So we know coughing and sneezing, but I don't think most people think about talking and how just by talking we throw particles into the air. We're pretty sure that if you're within 6 feet of someone who has coughed, sneezed, or talked, it could be transmitted to you. The droplets do not linger in the air, which basically means they evaporate and or the virus doesn't work anymore, but they can linger on surfaces. So this is why we would disinfect surfaces throughout our school and elsewhere. The average incubation period is 5.1 days, meaning that most people are infected for about 5 days before they show any symptoms, with most symptoms being, the first symptom being, for most people, a fever. But there's a big range. Anywhere from 2 to 14 days could be the time where you first experience any type of symptoms. And we know that there are some people out there that never get any symptoms, asymptomatic people, and they can still transmit the infection to others. And we know, pretty sure that your age group, children, are the ones that are most likely to be asymptomatic. How does this virus invade? So I've talked a little bit about it already. So you breathe in a droplet, and the virus will attach to epithelial cells in your lungs. Really, any cells that have an ACE2 receptor, and that would be a protein that sits out on the outside of a cell, and that's the route of entry for this virus. And once it attaches with the spike proteins, it will invade the cells and turn that cell into a virus factory and assemble new cells, and eventually that cell will die and burst open, and all of those new viruses will be released into the environment such that a person could cough or sneeze or talk, and it would be contained in a droplet and be able to spread elsewhere. Here's a picture of what that looks like. So over to the right, that would be like a lung cell. And the ACE2 receptors on the outside, those are natural proteins on the outside of cells. And you can see the spike protein would attach to the ACE2 to allow this virus to move inside the cell to reproduce itself, replicate itself. Common symptoms. The most common symptom is a fever. And most people get a fever above 99.5 degrees Fahrenheit. Second most common thing is a cough, and usually that's a dry cough. So that would mean not much mucus is coming up when people cough. Most people feel fatigue, they're tired, they want to lay in bed. A lot of people have a shortness of breath, which we would call dyspnea, and we'll learn more about that word in the next unit. And then just general body aches, which are common with viral infections, sore muscles, and sore body. 25% of all people develop pneumonia when CT scans are done on the chest. And it kind of depends where that pneumonia shows up. Sometimes it's in the lower lungs. Sometimes it's more lateral lungs. It just depends on the study that's been done. And all these studies are really in their infant stages on our understanding of this disease. Diagnosing and testing. So at this point in the United States, if you have a fever and if you have respiratory distress, you're coughing, you have shortness of breath, you can receive a written order from a physician, which is like a prescription to get tested. And I assume that the test can be done in Delaware County at the hospital, but I don't know who exactly can do tests right now in Delaware County. The way they will test someone is they'll take cotton swabs and put those into your nasal cavity. They are also supposed to cotton swab the throats, usually around the uvula and soft palate. And if possible, they like to swab the feces and possibly urine, but I've not heard, or take urine samples, but I've not heard too many people having that done. And then test kits were originally made by the CDC only. We'll check for the RNA in those samples to see if someone could be diagnosed as having a positive test for the coronavirus. We now know that there are a lot of private companies in the United States who have developed tests also, and it's just a matter of can we get those tests out to the healthcare places that need them so as many people can get tested as possible. I did read that our government went ahead and decided to pay for testing of anyone that needs a test. Treatment. The biggest treatment is isolation. So there are no current drugs that can cure this disease. There's no vaccination that can get rid of this disease. Your own specific immune system has to get rid of this disease, and that can take 14 days. So isolation from other people and from animals is really the only way to treat it right now. And yes, as I've mentioned, dogs and cats can get this disease also, so be aware. If someone is infected, they should wear a face mask when in the presence of someone else. France, the government of France and some healthcare workers in France are saying to stay away from Advil or ibuprofen and steroids as it can make the disease worse. France is also saying that Tylenol is the best um, pill to take to try to deal with the symptoms. We do know, in pretty much most people, this is a 14-day disease. It takes 14 days for this specific immune system to eliminate the virus. For severe cases, people will be hospitalized and most likely will receive oxygen support to breathe, which basically means they would wear a face mask or have tubes in their nose that would deliver oxygen into their body. They're still breathing on their own, and they would be hooked up to some oxygen tanks. Some people, however, we have to get more invasive with them, or we have to intubate. And intubation basically means putting tubes in your body. And those tubes are very invasive, where you are actually hooked up to a machine and that machine breathes for you to deliver oxygen into your lungs. And it could involve some surgical procedures to do that, or it could involve putting tubes deep into the body. There are no current drugs that one can take to get rid of the virus, although there are some clinical trials going on in the United States right now for people who have the disease, but no one can take any drugs at this point. For severe cases, we lengthen the disease out to about 3 to 6 weeks that someone would have it. And obviously, in the hospital, their main goal would be to maintain homeostasis in the patient of all body systems. Here's just a graphic showing some of the early data from China, where their death rate was 2.3%. That range has changed quite a bit. We've heard 2%, we've heard 3%. Italy right now seems to be a little bit higher. My calculations show Italy to be more like 5%, and that might be because of an older population in Italy. But you can see that 81% of all cases are mild, and that's the type of case we would definitely expect in children. How to prevent it, and isolation is number one. And you can see that the United States government and state governments and the CDC is very worried about people self-isolating, people staying away from other people staying away from large groups. Another part of this is we're going to have to self-quarantine, where certain age groups will probably be told to stay at home if they have the disease and to not have contact with other people and pets. As far as Indiana goes, we've seen several decisions in the last couple of days. Most schools are closed in the state. I believe 14 school districts are still open today, Monday, and that's a local decision made by districts. Obviously, we are closed for the next 3 weeks. CDC came out last night and changed their large groups from 250 to 50. So no large groups over 50 people throughout the United States. So you're going to see a lot of cancellations with that. Indiana just closed all restaurants to sit-down meals. So you can't go into McDonald's or Puerto Vallarta and sit down and have a meal. However, you can still carry out, and you can still get delivery, Grubhub, whatever. Most nursing homes have stopped visitors. The hospital has stopped visitors. Most daycares are closed. I do know of a few that are still open. And then many grocery stores throughout Indiana are cutting their hours down. Like a lot of the 24-hour grocery stores are now going to close at night to try to prevent the spread of the disease. But the biggest thing is isolation and staying away from those large groups. Here are my sources. I don't have full works cited here, but you're more than welcome to visit any of these sources. I think they are all legitimate sources, especially the New England Journal of Medicine, the CDC, being my top sources for this presentation. So that's a more in-depth look at the coronavirus than we've ever had. We've heard a lot about it since January, but we haven't really gotten in depth like this. So that's your lesson today. After spring break, we'll talk about how the human body would specifically deal with this virus.